Hi, everyone, and welcome to another FLAN Talk. Today we have Alexandra Butoi presenting, who just started a week ago her PhD at ETH Zurich in Ryan Cotterell's group. And now we will hear about her paper on convergence and diversity in the control hierarchy. Thank you for being here today, and you can take it from here.
Thank you for the intro, Lena. So yeah, I'm Alexandra. I'm a PhD student of Ryan Cottrell, and we recently presented this paper, also at ACL. So yeah, I'm gonna start with an overview of the presentation. So I'm gonna give a short intro on wires hierarchy, then present a few L2 formalisms, which are also known as tree-adjoining languages formalisms. Then I'm going to present wires' original control mechanism, which allows the progression in the hierarchy. And also I'm going to present how we extended wires' original mechanism to push down automata. Then I'm going to talk about equivalence between formalisms, because we introduced two new notions of equivalence. And then I'm going to talk about how how our extension of wires control mechanism allows coming up with a few new formalisms, which also inspired another tree-adjoining languages formalism, which we call pushdown automata, and I'm going to give details about that. So what's wires hierarchy? So David Wire, in this quite famous paper called A Geometric Hierarchy Beyond Context-Free Languages, he introduced a hierarchy of formal languages whose first member is the class of context-free languages. And then it is followed by a whole hierarchy of mildly context-sensitive languages with increased complexity. So as you can see in the figure, the first level, the one in green, is the context-free languages, and here are two examples of context-free languages: A to the N, B to the N, and W reversed, which are quite famous context-free languages. Then the next level, L2, is already a class of mildly context-sensitive languages, which includes A to the N, B to the N, C to the N, D to the N, and WW, which is also known as the copy language. And as you go up, you go to L3, which, as you could have guessed, contains A to the N, B to the N, C to the N, D to the N, E to the N, F to the N, and the double copy language. And so on. And at level K, you have, as an example of languages, X1 to the N, X to the N, until X to K to the N, and K minus 1 copy language. And each of these levels is enclosed in the next level in the hierarchy. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the first one is context-free languages, followed by mildly context-sensitive languages. And perhaps the most well-studied among all these levels is L2, which is also known as the class of tree-adjoining languages, because a very famous formalism for generating these languages is the tree-adjoining grammars. But there are many others. So tree-adjoining grammars, linear index grammars, head grammars, combinatory categorical grammars, embedded push-down automata, and so on. Many others. And the first four of these were proved to be weakly equivalent, which means they generate the same class of languages. Yeah, and this was proven in this famous paper by Vijay Shankar and David Wire, the equivalence of 4 extensions of context-free grammars. And in the paper, we actually proved that tree-adjoining grammars and linear index grammars are actually equivalent in a stricter sense than weak equivalence. So yeah, we also focus in our paper on L2, the class of tree adjoining languages. I'm going to give a short introduction on three of these formalisms for L2 for the people who aren't very familiar with them. So the first one is tree adjoining grammars, which is generally thought of as a tree generating formalism. But if you take the derived trees in the grammars and concatenate the leaves, you also get a string language. And actually in our paper, we think of tree adjoining grammars as a string generating formalism. So a tree adjoining grammars has rules of the form shown on the left. And actually, one important point is that we use a slightly different definition of tree adjoining grammars. That's the famous one. So this is inspired by a paper of Lang, which uses rewrite rules instead of trees. So in the more famous definition, the classic one, you have some elementary trees and then auxiliary trees which you can adjoin at different nodes in the trees and generate trees. But in our definition, you start with a start symbol and you use rewrite rules in order to derive new trees until all the nodes are labeled with either constant symbols or the leaves with terminal symbols. So the rules are of this form. You have a node on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side you have a tree, and the tree can contain at most one footnote, which is in this case the D, and it is marked with an asterisk. And all the other nodes are marked with a down pointing arrow, which means they are substitution nodes. And I'll explain in a minute how they are different. So if you have this tree F with children GA, and then A has a child H, then you can use a rewrite rule to rewrite any of the nodes. If the node is inside the tree, then it is replaced with the tree on the right-hand side of the rule, and then the subtree that was adjoined to the node gets attached back to the footnote. So in here, see that instead of A, the node A gets deleted and it gets replaced with a tree B, C, D, E, and the subtree, which is just H here, gets attached to node D, which was the footnote of the rule. And one important thing that perhaps not that many people know is that derived trees and derivation trees of tag are very different. So what I mean by derived tree is when you start with a symbol S and you continuously apply rules, you get at some point in the derivation you get some tree, and that would be a derived tree. But the derivation tree looks quite different, and it actually tells exactly what rules you can apply at a certain point in the derivation. So if you look at, so I have an example here. On the left, I have the productions of a tree adjoining grammar, and on the right of a derivation tree. And what it means is that, so say you start with an S, and then the first rule that you apply is beta 1. And then you are left with a tree that has two nodes, T and L3. And then in the next step, you could apply in any order either rule beta 2 or beta 6. And you could apply beta 2 to the nodes T, or the rule beta 6 to the node L3, and so on until you have a complete tree. Oh, by the way, if there are any questions, I can take questions anytime or at the end. It's completely fine for me.
I have one.
Okay.
What
I
was
go
like the
back?
little star close to L3? Is it
It's
just
a
the
footnote.
symbol or?
Yeah, you mark that as a it is the footnote. And you can have at most one in each right-hand side of a rule, and it means that when you replace, so what happens is that if you have an inside node of a tree, you replace that node with a tree on the right-hand side. But if the node had a subtree attached to it, then you need to attach back the subtree at the footnode. So as I showed here, the D node was the footnode, and the subtree of A, which was H, after substituting A with the tree on the right hand side, it gets attached back to D. So you need to know where to attach the subtree. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And the last formula that I'm going to talk about briefly is linear index grammars, which are very similar to context-free grammars, except each non-terminal has a stack attached. And the rules look in general like this. I'm assuming a normal form here. And in the whole paper actually. So on the left-hand side of the rules, you have a non-terminal and a stack with a symbol on top A. And on the right-hand side, you have a sequence of non-terminals, including one, which is a distinguished one that gets the stack of X. And also you can rewrite also the symbols at the top. So A gets replaced with BC and the rest of the stack remains unchanged. And the other symbols get augmented with the start symbol, with some start symbol. And also you have terminal rules, which are of the form X, augmented with the stack that has only a symbol A, which gets rewritten to a terminal node. And in a derivation tree, it would look like they would look like the trees on the right. So if you have a node that's augmented with a stack gamma A, then it would be split. The next step would be you'd have nodes Y1 augmented with S, yi augmented with the stack gamma bc, and so on, yk augmented with s. And for the other type of rule, you have x augmented with a, which gets rewritten as only a. And the last one is embedded pushdown automata, which is very similar to pushdown automata, except instead of a stack, you keep a stack of stacks at each step. And you can, at each step, you can transition from one state to another, and here from P to Q, and you can, okay, I think this picture is a bit wrong. But what you do is you pop the top symbol of the top stack, which is C in this case. And okay, sorry for the picture, but it's a bit wrong. B should be underneath E, not the other way around. So you can pop a symbol from the top stack and replace it with a sequence of symbols. In this case would be E. And also you can push new stacks on top and below of the current stack. And then the next step, you also can access only the top stack, actually the top symbol of the top stack. And now I'm going to go back to the control mechanism. And I'm going to start with Wire's original control mechanism. So Wire defines the progression in the hierarchy by defining a new type of grammar, which he calls a label distinguished grammar. And we call it the control E because these grammar's derivations are controlled by another grammar. So what's an LDCFG? It is it's actually very simple. It is only a context-free grammar that has label distinguished productions. And what that means that each production has a label, and on each right-hand side, you can have at most one distinguished non-terminal, which is marked, yeah, it is marked like this, like YI. And this allows the derivations to be filtered using a set of control words, and the set of control words is derived by the controller grammar. And the language defined by LDCFG is the set of strings having derivations whose control words are in the control set. This seems a bit complicated, but I'll go over one example in a minute. So say we have this control E grammar, G1, with labeled productions and also distinguished non-terminals on the right-hand sides, and the controller is G2. And the language defined by these grammars is A to the N, B to the N, C to the N, D to the N. And we use the right pointing triangle to say that the grammar G1 is controlled by the grammar G2. And one derivation in this, using these grammars, we read the following. So David Wire defines derivations like this. So you start with the star symbol of the control E, which gets augmented with the star symbol of the controller. And then you can apply rules either of the controller or the control E. So at the next step, here we can apply a rule of the controller. So S2 gets replaced with TL3. Then again, we can apply a rule of the controller. T gets rewritten as L1, T, L2. And then L1, again, is rewritten as small L1. And at each point, we can delete the leftmost terminal symbol of the controller and apply the rule with the same symbol. So in this case, L1 is deleted. This would be a sentential form. So it gets deleted and the rule is applied, and the rule of the control is applied. And each non-terminal on the right-hand side of these rules gets augmented with the star symbol of the controller. And what this means is that we introduce new control words. Okay, and so on. Then S2 gets written as L4, and then we can apply the rule L4 and derive A and so on until we derive the whole string. But the other steps are exactly the same. And we introduced in our paper, like we extended the control mechanism to push down automata. So we defined both controller PDAs and label distinguished PDAs, LPDAs, which have rules that resemble very closely the rules of the LDCFGs. So each transition of the PDA has a label, which is L, and on the right-hand side, so this PDA pops a symbol, and it can push new stack symbols, and among them there is at most one that is a distinguished stack symbol. And if you have a controller PDA, whenever the controller PDA scans an input symbol, it applies the same rule of the control E. So the rule with the same label. So as an example, here I have both a controller PDA and a control E PDA. And so we start from the initial configuration, say that Q is the initial state of the control E, and S1 is the initial stack symbol. and this stack symbol is augmented with the initial configuration of the controller, which is QS2. And again, we can apply either rules of the controller only, or we can apply rules of the controller which trigger some rule of the controllee. And in the next step, yeah, we apply only a rule of the controller and we get a new configuration, QTL3. We can apply again a rule of the controller. And in the next step, we can we apply both actually. So when we apply this rule QL1, scanning the terminal symbol L1, and it pushes nothing. And at the same time, we apply the rule label with L1 of the controllee, and we get this sequence of stacks, stack symbols. And again, each non-distinguished stack symbol is augmented with the initial configuration of the controller, which is in this case QS2. And in the next step, we apply we apply the rule of the controller QS2 scanning L4 goes to Q epsilon. And at the same time, we apply rule L4, which scans an A and deletes the stack symbol A. And so on until we get to the final configuration, which is Q epsilon. And one important thing is that in our paper, we make a very clear distinction between a derivation and the derivation tree. So if you have this this context-free grammar G2 that we just seen, a derivation tree would look like this. But derivation is just a sequence of items that get produced by applying a rule of the grammar. So in a derivation, you automatically assume an ordering in which you apply the rules, but in a derivation tree, you don't actually know whether, for instance, after producing, so you start with the star symbol S2, and then you produce a T and L3, but then the tree is unordered, so you don't know which subtree was produced next. So you could either apply rules to T and then L3, or the other way around, and you would produce the same tree. So I was mentioning the new notions of equivalence. The most common ones are weak equivalence, which just means that two formalisms produce the same language or accept the same languages, and strong equivalence, which if you think of strong equivalence in the context of context-free grammars, you need the grammars to produce the exact same trees in order for two grammars to be strongly equivalent. So we introduced two notions of equivalence that are somewhere in between these two. The first one would be D-weak equivalence, which requires a bijection between the derivation trees of the two formalisms, such that for any tree D of F, first formalism, D and phi of D yield the same string. And one example, so if you have these two context-free grammars, one which has only this rule, S goes to A, and it has a single derivation tree which produces A, and another context-free grammar G2, which has infinitely many derivations. So, and it has these rules, S goes to S, and then S goes to A, and it has infinitely many derivation trees. So there is no bijection between these sets of derivation trees, and therefore G1 and G2 are not D-weakly equivalent. But if we have a context-free grammar, one that has a rule S goes to AA, and another rule A, capital A goes to small a, this grammar has a single derivation tree which produces a string AA. And if we have a push-down automaton, P that has these rules, these two rules. P that pops S and pushes AA and goes to P again, and then this other rule. Again, this pushdown automaton has a single derivation tree, and one thing to notice is that we use, normally in the context of pushdown automata, you'd use the notion of a run, but we think of runs as derivation trees which have in which each node has at most one children. So this pushdown automaton has, again, a single derivation tree for the string AA. So therefore, G and P are the weakly equivalent. So there is a bijection between these derivation trees that's such that the yield is the same. The other notion of equivalence that we introduce is the strong equivalence, which requires two formalisms, F and F prime, to have some bijection between the derivation trees, such that for any tree D of F, D and phi of D yield the same string, and the trees are isomorphic as unlabeled, unordered trees. So if you look again at this context free grammar G and the pushdown automata P, they are not the strongly equivalent, because even though they yield the same string and there is a bijection between the derivation trees, these trees are not isomorphic because they have a different shape. So you require to have some isomorphism between the nodes of the trees. So yeah, this G and P are not the strongly equivalent. And now, so I just talked about how we extended wires control mechanism to push down automaton, and I show an example when both the controller and the controllee are PDAs, but actually you can get for formalism when you mix the controller CFG of PDA or a PDA with a controllee CFG and PDA. So you get a PDA that's controlled by a PDA, a CFG that's controlled by a PDA, and so on. And three of these are new. We introduced them in our paper, and one of them is all the one that was introduced by David Wire. And I will present what the trees look like in these four formalisms. Currently, we don't have a definition of a derivation tree that's generally enough for all of them. So I'll present for each of them what types of rules are allowed and what kind of trees they can generate. So I'll start with the PDA that's controlled by PDA because there's the simplest one. And I'll walk through a few subcases. So if the controller has a transition that is of this form, S pushes A, that pops A and pushes nothing, and that goes to final state and scans a symbol L. And if the controllee has a transition that's labeled also with L, and it is of this form, starting from from the state Q, you pop a symbol X, you scan A, and you get to some state R, and you push nothing. Then the derivation tree that's generated by the mix of these rules looks like the one here. So if you have a node that has, so the nodes in these formalisms are actually labeled with configuration. So at each point, you are in some state and you have a sequence of stacks, and each stack symbol is augmented with configurations of the controller. So X, you have on top of the stack a symbol X, which is augmented with the configuration S, and the stack A. And when applying these rules, you generate another node that is just R and Upsilon. And A here indicates that you also scan the symbol A. Another type of rule is if the controller has a rule of this form: S, pop A, read L, and go to T and push nothing. And the control E has a rule of this form that has multiple stack symbols on the right hand side, and one of them is distinguished, this Z here. So the derivation, if you have a node like this, Q, and if you have on top of the stack a symbol X that's augmented with the configuration S, A, beta, and then upsilon, which is a sequence of stack symbols. In the next step, you generate a node which pushes these symbols on top. Each of the non-distinguished one gets augmented with the initial configuration of the controller. The distinguished symbol gets augmented with the new controller state and the new controller stack sequence, which are T beta in this case, and so on, and the rest of the stack gets attached at the end. So if you remember how the PDA transitions, what the PDA transitions look like, it's already seems a bit similar, or should seem a bit similar. So, but basically what happens if you ignore the states, you push new stacks which are labeled, and each stack has a series of stack symbols inside, and the rest gets attached below. So yeah, all these non-distinguished stack symbols would resemble pushing new stacks below or above the current stack. And the final case is when applying only a rule of the controller. So you pop A and you push a sequence of stack symbols, gamma. So X only gets augmented with a new configuration of the controller, which is T, gamma, beta. And this is a full derivation in a PDA controlled by a PDA for the string A, B, B, C, C, D, D. Like if you want, I can stop for a bit to have a closer look at this. But yeah, all these nodes are one of the cases that I talked about. So in a PDA controlled by a PDA, actually a derivation corresponds to is the same thing as a derivation tree, because each node can have at most one children. The next one is PDA controlling a CFG, and again, there are three subcases. When the controller has a rule of this form: Q, pop A, scan L, and go to a final state and push nothing. And the control E has a rule labeled with L, and yeah, it rewrites X as A. And if you have a node of this form, you can you generate another node just labeled with L. The next case is when the controller has a transition from Q, pops A, scans L, goes to state R, and pushes nothing. And the control E has, again, a rule labeled with L that has multiple symbols on the right-hand side, and among them there is one that is distinguished one. And the tree that is generated is the one shown on the slide. If you have a node labeled with X, which is augmented with the configuration Q, A, beta, then its children are Y1 to YK, and among them there is Z, which gets the new configuration of the controller, and all the other symbols get the initial configuration of the controller. And the last one is very similar to to the one I talked about before. When you only apply a rule of the controller, that just pops a symbol A, scans nothing, goes to state R, and pushes a sequence of stack symbols gamma. So if you have a node that's labeled with X and it has a configuration Q A beta, then X gets a new configuration of the controller R gamma beta. And this one is a full derivation of the string A, B, B, C, C, D, D in a configuration of a CFG that's controlled by a PDA. And if you are familiar with linear index grammars, this tree looks actually exactly like a derivation tree of a linear index grammar. Okay, the next formalism is a context-free grammar, controlling a context-free grammar. If the controller has a rule that has an A that rewrites as an L, and the controllee has a rule that's labeled with L and has on the left hand side an X that's rewritten as an A, then you get a subtree of this form that has a node X augmented with A that just gets rewritten as A. The next case is when the controller has again a rule A that rewrites as L, and the controllee has a rule that's labeled with L, and on the left hand side it has a symbol X, and on the right hand side has the symbols Y1 to YD1, then Z, which is a distinguished symbol, and then YD plus 1 until YK. And then if you have a node in a derivation that's labeled with Y/Z, so what's important here is that in a CFG controlling CFG, and we'll see it next in a CFG controlling PDA, the control words get fragmented. So we need to keep track the symbols of the controllee between which the controller symbol gets deleted. So in this case, we have a node labeled with X/Z that's augmented with an A, which has a children Y1 until YD minus 1. Each of them are augmented with the star symbol of the controller, and then YD plus 1 until YK, and all of them are again are augmented with the star symbol of the controller. And Z actually gets deleted because the symbol A is just so the symbol A is rewritten as L, and at the same time the same rule is applied, so we get nothing here. And the last case is when the controller has a rule A gets rewrites as B1 until BK, and we have a subtree of this form. And again, we need to keep track between which controllee symbols the controller symbols get rewritten. This is a bit of a detail, and I won't talk much about it because there isn't enough time. But if you want to have a look, we explain this more in the paper why we have these these symbol annotations. And this would be a full derivation tree in a CFG controlling a CFG. And if you remember the derivation tree for tag that I showed before, they're actually the same. So yes, the next one would be a CFG controlling a PDA. This one is the most complex. So if you have if the controller has a rule A goes to L, and the controllee has a transition of this form, then and we have a node in a derivation tree that's labeled with the state Q and the stack symbol X, which is augmented with the symbol A, and then a series of stacks. Then we can scan A and we get this new node Q epsilon. So it's very similar to the case that we've seen before. So basically what happens is that the stack X just gets deleted, and the top of the stack becomes the top of epsilon. The next case is when the controller has a rule A goes to L, and the controllee has a transition labeled with L. The tops X scans nothing and then pushes a series of new stack symbols, among which there is Z, which is the distinguished one. And again, we push, if we have a node of this form, then we push new stacks, each augmented with the star symbol of the controller, and we push all of these on top of the series of stack symbols epsilon. And the last case is where we apply only a rule of the controller, which is just A gets rewritten as B1 to BK, and the subtree that's generated by this rule is has this form. So if we have a rule X, if you're in state Q, and then we have a stack symbol X / Z augmented with the symbol A, then, and okay, I think this is a bit wrong because, oops, this should be followed by epsilon. So we generate new nodes, and we can attach epsilon at any of these nodes actually, and it would still be correct. So what it means is that you need to rewrite all the non-terminals in the current stack before you can process the next stack. That's a bit more complicated. We can discuss more at the end. So what we proved here is that trio joining grammars, linear index grammars, and embedded pushdown automata have derivation trees whose shape are exactly the same as those of CFGs controlling CFGs, PDAs controlling CFGs, and PDAs controlling PDAs. But for the last formalism, the CFGs controlling PDAs, we didn't know of the existence of any formalisms whose derivation trees look like this. So we came up with a new, so this would be a derivation tree in a CFG controlling a PDA. Sorry for the detour. So we didn't know of the existence of any formalism that had the derivation trees that look exactly like CFGs controlling PDAs. So we came up with a new formalism, which we called pushdown adjoining automata. So a pushdown adjoining automata is a 5-tuple which contains where sigma is an alphabet of input symbols, V is a finite set of variable stack symbols, C is a finite state of constant stack symbols, and delta is a finite state of transitions, and S is the initial stack symbol. So as in a PDA, you start with the initial stack symbol. We don't have states here, so we have only sequences of stacks. So what happens is that a pushdown adjoining automaton maintains a stack of symbols, which can be either variable or constant symbols. So a variable symbol can be written while a constant symbol cannot. And each stack symbol is augmented with another stack, which can be empty. So in here, we have a top level stack, which is ABC, where the top of the stack is A, and then B is augmented with another stack, which is DE. and A and C are augmented with empty stacks. So we treat the stacks in a pushdown adjoining automaton as nested stacks, but actually formally they can be thought of as trees, where the root is labeled with a special with a special symbol. So for this stack that I've shown before, ABC would actually have a tree that has this topology. So we have ABC, where A is on the left, and B is augmented with two other symbols, D and E. And we have two types of transitions. Just like they're very similar to the ones in triadjoining grammars, actually. But we have transitions with a variable symbol on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we have another stack. So you can think of as a tree. And the stack, just like in a triadjoining grammar, can have a foot. And when the stack has a foot, then also X, the symbol on the left-hand side, is also marked with a foot. So at each step in the computation, we can operate only on the topmost stack that has a variable symbol on top. So we go to the topmost stack, and if we don't have any variable symbol that we can rewrite, we go down. But if there is a transition, X that scans A and pushes C, then we can pop X, scan A, and then push C. And if X had a stack attached, then the stack that was previously attached to X becomes attached to the foot of the new tree, which is C. And whenever a constant symbol has an empty stack, it can simply be deleted. And we'll go over one example. If we have a pushdown adjoining automaton with these types of rules, so the first one S goes to TL3, doesn't have a footnote, but the one below it has a footnote, as is marked with this symbol. And we start with the distinguished star symbol S, and we apply rules. So S gets rewritten as TL3. Then again, we apply the top symbol that is a variable is T. So we need to apply a rule to T. And before, T had a subtree attached to it, which was L3. And this subtree gets attached to the subtree of the tree on the right-hand side. So L3 gets attached to L2. And so on. Now, the top variable symbol is L1. So we apply a rule to L1, which gets rewritten as A, X, and D. And the X is actually constant symbols here. In the next step, the leftmost variable symbol is A. So we apply a rule to A, which just rewrites to epsilon. And then in the top stack, we don't have any variable symbol that we can access. So we go down the tree and we reach the symbol T in the second level. And again, we apply a rule to T and so on until we empty the stack. So the last steps would be we have X, D, and X has a stack attached to it, which is just D. So to the second level stack, we apply the rule D scans A, rewrites to epsilon. And then we actually there will be an intermediate step here. So X would have an empty stack. And since X is a constant symbol, then we can just delete it. And we get just a stack with D, which again, we can apply the same rule and we get the stack epsilon. So we empty the stack. So we have a complete derivation. formalism. And actually, I'll show also what happens in the tree. So we saw the stacks as nested stacks, but we look at what happens in the tree. So if we have this transition L rewrites as AXD in the run that we've just seen, we get this series of nested stacks. But in the underlying trees look like this. So we have just the monadic tree. Each node has at most one children, and the root is labeled with this special symbol. And L1 gets rewritten as AXD, and the rest of the tree gets attached to X. So if you remember the rules in tree-adjoining grammars, this looks very similar, but the difference is that in a tree-adjoining grammar, you can apply the rule. You can apply a rule to any symbol, to any node that is labeled with a variable symbol. But in here, you can always do that at the leftmost, topmost symbol. I hope that makes sense. And we can continue like this. So what I was just saying, we need to apply the next transition to A. So this node here gets deleted in the next step. Okay, so that was all. As a summary, in our paper, we came up with an extension of wire control mechanism, which has pushed down automata both as the controllee formalism and as the controller formalism. We introduce new notions of equivalence between formalism. They sit between the well-known strong equivalence and weak equivalence. A new formalism pushed down adjoining automaton, and it also proved that we get this strong equivalence between CFGs controlling CFGs and tree adjoining grammars, PDAs controlling CFGs and linear index grammars, CFGs controlling PDAs and push down adjoining automaton, and PDAs controlling PDAs and embedded push down automaton. And we have one final result that I didn't talk about, but we also prove in the paper that we get D-weak equivalence between these four two-level formalisms: CFGs, CFGs, PDA, CFGs, CSGs, CFGs, PDAs, and PDAs, PDAs. Okay, so that was the talk, and I can answer any questions.